I'm Kim Ritz. I'm from TV Line. How many of you guys were here for Mike's panel this morning? Okay, all right. I won't use my jokes from that panel then. Okay. With no further ado, the man who made me afraid of a jump scare in a car, Mike Flanagan, come on in. I have not forgiven you for that yet, by the way. Who expects a jump scare in a car? All right. So we are obviously here today to talk about the monologues that are in this man's amazing work, which includes The Haunting of Hill House, The Haunting of Bly Manor, The Fall of the House of Usher, The Midnight Club. And you just outside said something to me that surprised me. You said the monologues are the things that you got the most static for.
Yeah, absolutely. No, they're kind of consistently the thing that I get the most criticism for. In the online reactions that I am not supposed to read, but I always read. And sometimes on an executive level too. I'll get a lot of people are excited about the show or they're excited about this or that, but they'll say, but no monologues.
They're like, no talking.
Yeah. And I'm always like, oh yeah, no, and then go home. But yeah, it's been a not entirely uncontroversial feature of my career for sure.
So talk to me about, I'm going to get in the weeds with you. I hope that's okay with everybody, right? But start off with when to monologue? When does it come into you that this character needs to be talking for a few minutes?
So I will say I never set out to write a monologue. That never happens. I'm never now time for the monologue. I usually realize it's happening at a certain point. There's just a lot of words on the page. And I'll kind of be like, yeah, it's happening again. And it's something that I've become aware of because I love a good monologue. It's something that when I grew up, my favorite movie as a child was Jaws, and Quint's monologue about the Indianapolis at the heart of that movie knocked me out when I was a kid, and to this day. And then as I got older, I would look at movies like Paris, Texas, with Harry Dean Stanton, who has a jaw-dropping monologue at the end of the film. The character doesn't speak for the first hour of the movie and then talks uninterrupted for 11 minutes at the end, and it's profound. So I've always admired it, and I think it's an art form that is increasingly rare in movies and television. Theater has held on to it admirably. But I think as our attention spans keep being assaulted and people get used to shorter and shorter bursts of content, which is a word I just hate. My kids, I have 3 kids, and they prefer watching YouTube to watching movies or television because it's shorter. And if I put on a movie for them, they'll say it's too long, and it just breaks my heart. So it's something I've tried to push back a little on and just say, yeah, sometimes sitting down and really losing yourself in words and letting a great actor kind of ignite a story in your imagination, a story or an idea that has its own music and rhythm and can really kind of transport you is a really wonderful thing to try to include in this huge, loud avalanche of, stimulation that has become film and television and entertainment in general. But yeah, I never sit down and go, I'm going to do a monologue today. Usually by the time I hit the bottom of the page, it's just yep, I've got more to say. And then if I start imagining, if it's written for a particular actor and I'm just Kate's going to kill this, or the Lemon monologue, which I think we're going to look at.
Yeah, we're going to look at a few of them today.
That when that started, because it was meant to be a 2-line joke, and it was a joke. It's kind of like with Midnight Mass, if you guys have seen that show, there were monologues because I had a lot to say, and it was this is a chance to say what I believe. With the Lemon thing, it was a joke, and it just kept happening. It just kept writing. And I just became giddy about the idea of any actor performing it. So yeah, they kind of come out of nowhere.
I mean, that's a really good intro to watch the Lemon monologue, which I said we were going to do second. I'm sorry. Can we watch it now? Would that be okay? You guys, who's seen Usher in here? Okay, good. So we don't have to set it up. You guys know what's going on. Okay. Let's watch. I want to know the Lemon lines that got cut from that. Like, what were some of the Lemon that didn't quite make the cut?
Nothing got cut. And you can tell because we never cut the camera. Because half the joke was that if we stayed on Bruce the whole time, and it's just a slow push with no edits, that the laugh would be when we cut back to Carl Lumley afterward. And it worked.
You got it.
Yeah. I've never seen this with an audience, so I'm relieved. Yeah. But yeah, it was supposed to be just a 2 or 3 line joke about the lemons. And it just kept happening that it was like, oh, here's another example of horrible kind of corporate behavior we can apply to lemons. And I'm sure a lot of you guys know, like the whole cross-pollinated patented seed things, like Monsanto's whole thing, which is one of the most evil kind of things I could imagine a corporation, doing. And so we knew we wanted to end with that. But yeah, I remember handing it to Bruce Greenwood, and on the page it's just this giant block. And he was like, all right. And he's, we've worked together before. We did Gerald's Game together, which was a ton of monologues. And so Bruce knew how I hit him on Gerald's Game with a monologue that was 4.5 minutes with a slow push and a turn, and there were no edits. And I remember that day, he was like, there's no edit? And I was like, no, there's not even a reverse shot on Carla. This is it. If you fuck up, we got to start over. And so with this one, it was the same. And he kind of looked at it. He knew the drill, and he was like, "You're not going to cut away, are you?" And I was like, "Nah, you gotta. We're gonna play some really ironic music, and we're just gonna do it." And he kind of took a deep breath and ran the lines a whole bunch in the weeks leading up to it. And then on monologue day, the actors call them flanelogues on the show. Rahul Kohli started that, calling them flanelogues, and so he showed up on his flanelogue day, and Lumley sat across from him and was just like, I do not envy you. All I have to do is look surprised at the end. But yeah, so that was the lemons.
So you wrote what you wrote, just like there was the lemons poured out of you and that was it? Or how much refining do you do generally between?
Definitely do refining. And on the page, there were probably 3 or 4 drafts of the episode. I think it was longer. They're always longer than what you guys get. So if you're ever watching them and you're like, this is too long, you should have seen it at the beginning. We try very actively on the last round before we go into prep to remove anything that might even be on the bubble of unnecessary. And so they tend to get anywhere between, like a quarter or a half shorter by the time we get to lens. Which upsets the actors because they start learning it very early because they're nervous about it. And then they show up having to learn the new version, and they'll sometimes put things in that I'd cut out because they had already memorized it. But yeah, so they always get trimmed, and then I always kind of, on the night before, will read them a few times out loud and just say, am I certain I need every word? And at the time, I always say yes. And then a year or 2 later, I say no. So I could have cut more. Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's my next question, which seems really simple, but I don't mean it to be. How do you know when it's too long, and how do you know when it's too short?
I don't. I try to guess. I'll read it out loud. Kate is usually a great sounding board for this. I just look for, if I'm reading it to someone, I look for them to drift. Even if they say, no, it's great, but I saw them kind of go over here. I look for cues like that. Sometimes on set, an actor will feel the rhythm as they perform it and say, I just feel like I went to the well one time too many, or I felt like I was pushing to kind of keep it engaging. So I'll look for cues like that, but I have no idea. And on some other scenes, I'll be convinced it's right on set, but in the cutting room, have to admit that it isn't and cut things out that way, which if you see a monologue scene that cuts back to the other person listening, 100% of the time, something's been removed there. I only cut to someone listening to cover up an edit.
So they're all conceived as like single shot.
Yes.
Okay.
They are all intended to be single shots. And if I'm really confident, I will not shoot that reaction shot so that no one can force me to make an edit later. That's a real gamble, though.
You know that scene in Speed where she's like, "You needed another challenge," after he like puts the knife in the gas tank. Like I'm like, oh, isn't it hard enough without giving yourself options?
And sometimes I'll look at it and I'll listen to it and I'll be like, turn around, get a reaction shot, because I'll know I'll want it in the cutting room. And that's a nice thing to realize on set. It's like, this isn't necessarily going to work. It might, but I should protect myself. And then sometimes I will very stubbornly triple down and make it impossible to cut out of it. And I did that a few times on Midnight Mass, where there's a midpoint series of monologues I think we were gonna do today, but we had issues with the clips. But or it might have been a different part of it. But there's the exact midpoint of the series is 2 monologues. There's one by Zach Gilford that is a completely unbroken shot, pushes to close, and then it turns around on Kate and does another completely unbroken push to close. There is nothing to cut to, and it's 9.5 minutes between the two of them.
It's also awesome.
I'm very proud of it, and that's one where to this day I'll watch it and go, yes, that's what I wanted it to be. I don't want to change anything. But there was a lot of talk on the day, especially from the poor actors. It was like, you sure you don't want to just turn around in case? Because we'd get 8 takes deep, and be doing a 4.5-minute monologue and say you're perfect for 4 minutes, and you flub one word, there's nothing to cut back to. We're starting over, and all that goes away. And so for actors, that can be really tough, and they'll sometimes be like, if you have the cutaway, I'm not going to get this perfect all the way through, but I'll do most of it. I really want to protect the first half of what we just did. I'm not going to beat that, and then I'll get the cutaway so that we can stitch it. Yeah.
Are there any that were a particularly tough nut to crack when you were writing them? Were there any that you kind of had to fight for more?
A lot in Midnight Mass. The 2 that I just mentioned were the monologues of Midnight Mass are very personal, and on the razor's edge for me of kind of the difference between storytelling and confession. And especially by the end of it, I didn't have to. I put myself in a scenario where I was meant to try to summarize what I feel and believe about life after death in a single monologue. And I agonized over that for a very long time. I started writing Midnight Mass 11 years before we filmed it. And that monologue was part of the earliest draft. And it changed radically over the decade between that and when it lensed, because I changed radically. But that one was very hard to get right. And you'll see we're cutting all over the place. It's not a push into close. We're all over the island. We're checking with other characters. The music is kind of incredible. And that one, even in post, I was tinkering. I was moving words around. I was changing the order of some of the ideas as they were presented. I never quite stopped tinkering with it. That was probably of all of them, that one and there are 2 in Hill House that I remember being kind of agonizing to write. One is the Mr. Dudley monologue that Robert Longstreet delivers about his past and about his wife, and that one we did get in one, but I remember Robert was really nervous, and I had a real hard time writing it because it was a lot of exposition, it was a lot of storytelling, and then the other one that I agonized over was in the finale of Hill House, which is what people have come to call the confetti monologue, that Victoria Pedretti gives, which I believe.
Yeah, we're going to watch that in a second. Yeah. Or now.
Yeah, whenever. But,
yeah. So so that we give our friend a minute to cue it up. You've mentioned that, for editing's sake, right, you might cut away. But narratively, I've noticed that sometimes you have the person tell the story. Sometimes you have the person narrate the story and we're watching it play out. And sometimes you have the person, like in Midnight Club, you have the person introduce the story and then it kind of goes to the action. And I'm wondering, what's your litmus test for when you do what?
A lot of that is kind of blindly trial and error for what feels right for a story. And there are a lot of really fun ways to kind of break up a monologue and turn it into narration, turn it into a structural element where it becomes the spine and ribs of that particular story moment, and you get to fill out the rest of the body with other visuals, which is also really exciting. I love the purity of just sitting and watching an actor say the words, without all the bells and whistles. And I love using a monologue as basically the primer coat for a whole visual sequence. That it's two very different approaches. But we kind of feel it out. Sometimes they're scripted that way. And you can tell on the page it's broken up over all these different, all these different scenes. And then other times it isn't. And sometimes it's meant to be a big monologue, and I'll say in post, it's not holding my interest the way I thought it would. Let's try to turn it into a montage. Let's try to make it something that's more visually captivating. And that's all kind of feeling it out.
Let's watch the confetti. I'm going to try to hold it together. Let's watch the confetti monologue now.
In many ways, the opposite of the lemons here.
How much are you thinking when you give something like that to an actress like Victoria? Like, how much are you thinking, this is not related to her, but can this person do this? Like, can we make the thing I want together? How much is based on the actor?
Oh, in this case, quite a lot. So one of the crazy things about Hill House was I was writing episodes of the show while we were shooting it. So we went into production, I think, with the first 6 episodes written. And while we were shooting, I had to continue working on 7, 8, 9, and 10. And so we were a ways into production by the time I sat down to write the finale. And I would shoot all day and then come home and work on it at night. And by then, I'd seen kind of firsthand what Victoria was doing. And Victoria's a phenomenal actor, phenomenal, and had already kind of, made this character someone that I had completely fallen in love with as a writer. And the plan wasn't to have a lot of monologues at the end of Hill House. It was meant to be exciting and kind of visceral and all ghosty. That's what we promised the studio when we sold the show. Big finale, fireworks. And the finale is just a series of monologues. It's just every character gets to go have a seat, and then the big showdown between Steve and the ghost is that he very slowly walks out of the house, and they're like, okay, because it wasn't about that. And so this, when I was writing it, I knew Victoria was going to do an amazing job with it. There was no doubt in my mind. And there was more. It's funny that the scene starts before this. There's actually minutes more of monologue before the monologue you just watched. It was we shot mostly in chronological order on the show. This was toward the end of the shoot. The shoot remains one of the most difficult things that I ever lived through. I lost like almost 40 pounds shooting the show. I did not enjoy it. It was a brutal birth for the Haunting of Hill House. And by the time we were shooting this, the entire cast was beyond exhausted and spent, doing. If any of you want to direct television, I think absolutely do it. If someone says, hey, you should direct 10 episodes of television yourself, say no. It's too much. And so by this point, it was all kind of like we were running on fumes, everybody. And so I remember that day being in that really depressing set, covered with mold and fake mold. I remember watching her do that, and I was crying at the monitor. A big difference between this and the Lemons, look at how much we're cutting. Look at how much we're zipping around. There's a lot of visual editorial storytelling happening in that sequence, but it still very much feels like Victoria has you, in the palm of her hand, because she does. Yeah.
You have, it's not always that the person who writes the words gets to direct the action, right? How do you approach directing these scenes? Is there any special way you go into it? Do you want people to rehearse? Do you not want them to rehearse? Like, talk to me about the day.
I never presume to tell an actor what to do for their process. I'm married to an actor. I tried to be an actor in college. I was a theater minor. I was terrible at it, but I loved it. And so my thing is very much, I've hired this actor to create this character. However they need to do that, I'm there to support that process. I like to learn what it is so that I can be supportive of it. But when they show up on the day, my first thing is to ask them what they need for the day, what they're worried about. I don't want to put a bunch of stuff in their head about a scene like this because they've already got all these words in their head. So the first thing is just to see what they've got. And we always roll on that because it might be magic. And then sometimes if I make an adjustment, it'll be about a little section here or there. I like to think I never want to pile more than 2 thoughts onto an actor in between takes. I think 2 is about as much as they can hold and respond to without letting go of all of the work that they've done in order to remember how many notes I'd given and what they were. So I picked 2, and I sandwich them between compliments, always. Tell them something I loved about the previous take, here are the 2 things, and something else I loved about the take. And that seems to work. With Rahul Kohli, he has a monologue in Midnight Mass about 9/11 and about his experience as a Muslim on the NYPD after. And it's a really cool monologue and a story that I really wanted to tell in the show. And he asked me, he was like, I need help kind of finding it. I'm not sure, how angry am I? Because I don't want it to come off like that. I don't want it to come off confrontationally. And so I just gave him 1 word. And the word I gave him for that monologue was dignity. And he went, got it. And he ran in, and what you see in the show is the dignity version. And it's funny, he still says it to me. We're great friends, and he's over all the time. And every now and then, it'll be a great punchline for us at dinner, Or he's like, yeah, I was auditioning for this ridiculous video game, and I thought dignity. And I'm like, I'm sorry, it worked. But yeah, so it depends on the actor. But I try to stay out of their way. Half my job is casting the right actor to begin with, and if I've done that, I'm not there to direct them. I'm there to support them, and sometimes they need a little nudge here or there just to keep them on the track. But for the most part, it's about removing distractions and creating an environment around them that frees them up to do their best work. And that's my job, more than getting this line right or making the actors say it the way I heard it. I want them to say it the way they hear it. And most of the time we agree.
I'm struck by, because I get to do this panel, I'm going to go deep on something I want to know. So Oliver Jackson Cohen in Bly has a very tricky threading of the needle monologue where he's telling us stuff without actually telling us stuff about his childhood, right? Please just tell me something about the shooting of that day. Tell me something about you coming up with that, or how he
and here's a great
interacted with
example. I did not direct that. I only directed 1 episode of Bly, so that's a great example of what
Were you around though?
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, you weren't on vacation. You were there.
No, and sometimes I have to force myself to leave set because sometimes I can tell that just being there kind of over the shoulder of the director becomes unfair to the director. And that I've had it in my head a certain way from script, and sometimes they're directing actors who I've worked with a bunch and they haven't, and so I find myself sitting there and I'm next to them at monitor and I feel them just kind of looking over. And if I'm like, during a take, or I'm like, no, you know what you want to do, and then I have to kind of check myself and be like, I need to get out of there. I need to get out of their space. I remember with Oliver in that particular case, he and I talked a lot in prep and over the course of the pilot about the needle he had to thread for Peter Quint, which is a really tough character. And Oliver's super charming, like you like him, and especially fans of Hill House. He's Luke, you like him, And Peter Quint is not. likable so much. And it was important to Oliver that he was like, I just want him to be more than just awful. Like, can he just have any other shade to him? He suggested that monologue and was like, what if, here's some ideas about his backstory that I can latch onto that'll help me look at him as a human being enough to play him and still understand why he does these horrible things. And I'm not looking to redeem him. I just want to understand him. He wrote down a bunch of ideas about that and sent them to me. That monologue is a reaction to his notes. And in a lot of ways, he, in his work of shaping his performance for the character, created the story that made the character what it was. And it was up to me to take a lot of those ideas and put them into the voice that we'd written for that character so that Oliver could then reclaim that and put it into the voice he'd created for him. Carla Gugino will send me emails full of ideas, sometimes down to individual lines of dialogue for a project. And I'm thrilled to, I'm a best idea wins person. And if an actor has a great idea, I want it in the show, especially when they're out on a limb like they are. So I'm thrilled to collaborate that way. And then other times, with Midnight Mass especially, there are ones where I'm like, this one is coming from such a personal place. I'd very much appreciate, that we stick to the script unless you guys feel very strongly about something, in which case, please bring it to me and we'll find the best version that makes us both feel good about it. But yeah, it's I love it when actors get in there. It's just tough because that's not a door I want open to every actor as they first arrive. It's an earned kind of, I have to trust them enough to open that door. And it can be tough when I have actors come in who haven't worked with us before and they see the way Carla and I interact, or Carla's like, oh yeah, I sent Mike a bunch of notes last night that he rewrote overnight and it's already in the script. And like, oh, we can do that? And I'm like, no.
No, you can't.
Carla can do that. Maybe you can do that later, like after a couple more jobs together.
I'm not going to make you say who, but is there anyone you've written a monologue for that it just did not work?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And people who I've written monologues for people who I work with all the time. I've written stuff for Kate to say that I thought would be a great monologue, and I'm like, no, it's not working. It's not her fault. It's my fault. It's the writing.
Yeah, but is it ever their fault? Is there ever been a time it's their fault?
Yeah, sometimes it's their fault. Of course, yeah. There's plenty of fault to go around on a set. Yeah, but mostly with the writing, it's my fault. And I just did a movie this past fall that I'm very proud of. That has a real doozy of a monologue in it that Mark Hamill delivers. And it's my favorite piece of acting I've ever seen from Mark Hamill. And it's a 4.5 minute, it's just, yes. There were other scenes that were kind of monologue-y in there for other actors. And there was one in particular where the actor did exactly what I wanted. It's exactly how I heard it. I looked at it. It was 7 minutes. And the movie lived with it for weeks. And I was sitting in the cutting room and I just had this feeling. And I was like, I just think this scene will land much better if no one says a word. And I recut it so that it was just 3 reaction shots of characters sitting in silence that I took from in between chunks of the monologue. And it's so much better. And I had to call the actor and say, I'm sorry. You did it right. I messed up. And I wrote a scene that said out loud a bunch of stuff that I shouldn't have said out loud because it was all there. And it was all there without words. And if it can be there without words, it's always better. The words are great, but if you can tell the story silently, that's pure. And that's cinema. That's the goal. Sometimes you have to write 8 pages of monologue to get there. But in this case, I had to very clearly say to this wonderful actor, I failed you in this. I overwrote this. I thought I needed to do it. I was wrong. You were great. And I'll owe you on the next thing.
You mentioned before the studios. Give me an example of some of the things that they've told you about the monologues, and did you heed those notes or not?
That's a great question. It started with Hill House. The note would come in, we think this should be shorter. Not this section of the monologue doesn't work, or this section is repetitive, or I feel like we're beating a dead horse, you've made the point. It should be shorter. And I can't address that note. Like, that to me is like, why? Why should it be shorter? If there's something that isn't working, let's be specific. But if it's simply an appetite for shorter, I don't know how to address that. Because what? I just start cutting words out? I cut out breath? What do I do to make it just the same but shorter? I tried to do that on the page to get us here. So that's how it starts, is always just, hey, could this be shorter? Or, hey, this is long. I'll say, yeah, it's long. It's anything more than 3 sentences in a row to a lot of studio executives is long. It's too long. And that's about their perceived attention span of the audience. But as you can probably tell, I like to talk. It takes me a lot more sentences to get that out. And then it can be, I've gotten it as blanket as this project should not have monologues, just period.
You're like, do you know who you are employing?
Sometimes I'll be like, no problem. And then
do whatever you want.
But then there are other times where I agree. And like at the moment, it was just announced or confirmed that I'm doing The Exorcist.
Let's get a hand for that, please.
And yeah, it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be really cool. Part of what I said to Blumhouse and Universal when we were discussing it was like, I don't think this is a monologue project. The ritual itself is something of a monologue, but we've seen that. And when you see somebody shouting prayers at somebody, that was scary 50 years ago, maybe. I don't see that working here. But they were concerned, and I understand why. They said, well, it's just, it's theatrical. It's for an audience, younger audiences drive horror theatrically. That's a fact. A lot of the audiences that will come see this likely haven't seen the original and aren't going to be impressed with any allusions to that. And they said, so this isn't really where you want to be doing long monologues about religion and faith. And I said, I completely agree with you. And if it makes you feel any better, I made that show. I already got it out of my system. And yeah, this should just be really scary. And that means the character work, it's still on me to make them real and relatable and emotionally relevant. But this isn't the project where we should be monologuing. And I had to say, you're right. So, yeah.
In a minute, I'm going to come to you guys for questions, so get ready. But first, I'm going to ask you, your house is on fire. You can only grab 2 of your monologues. What are they?
Midnight Mass, What Happens When We Die. And then probably the lemons, because it makes me laugh every time.
That was so fast. I expect you to be like, I can't pick. They are so good. All right, that gives you guys more time for questions. So let's see, raise a hand. Anyone? Right here in the front.
First of all, thank you so much for being here. This has been amazing. I kind of have a twofold question. You mentioned that you have a movie coming out. What is it, and when can we see it?
So the movie is called The Life of Chuck.
Okay.
It is based on a short story by Stephen King. However, it is not a horror movie at all. Because a lot of people forget Stephen King wrote Stand By Me, or the Body, which became Stand By Me, Shawshank Redemption. It's more that Stephen King.
Okay.
So it's a beautiful movie. It was really fun for me to do something outside of the horror genre that just made me feel good about being alive. If you've read the short story and If It Bleeds, it's incredible. I don't know when it will be out because we made it completely independently and we do not have a distributor yet. So we'll likely premiere the movie at a film festival later this year and try to sell it then. But it's I can tell you it's Tom Hiddleston, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Karen Gillan, and Mark Hamill kind of headline it. And it's my favorite movie I've ever
It's just a little
worked on.
indie movie.
Yeah.
Just
Little indie. Little indie. It is actually. It was.
No.
It was a strike. People were available to work. It was great. Yeah.
And my second question is, why do you hate cats so much? What did they do to you?
All right, I'm going to get monologuing. I do not hate cats. This is one of my favorite things about the internet. I have worked on a number of things that, through no fault of my own, do put cats in harm's way, along with dogs, people, and all sorts of things. But I would just like, in my defense, to say that in the fall of the House of Usher, we adapted Edgar Allan Poe's story, The Black Cat, in which a cat is horribly mutilated and killed. That's what Edgar Allan Poe did. And I said, no, nope, we can do that, but it's a dream and it's all an illusion, and that cat needs to be safe and alive and sound at the end of that episode. And he is. So, yeah. I also don't hate hands, but we can save that for another time. That's a Stephen King thing.
How about over here? Hold on for 1 second. Wait for the microphone, please. Thanks. Hold on for 1 second. I didn't give my caveat, which is question. Not that you were going to do this, but questions have a question mark at the end, and I will shut you down if you go too long. Okay? There we go.
Okay. A monologue is an awful lot like a comedy skit. If you listen to Seinfeld, basically it's going through. But a comedy skit is done to engage, and a monologue seems to be more telling. How do you balance telling versus engaging with a monologue?
Oh, first of all, that's a phenomenal question, and I think a spot-on assessment. The answer is going to disappoint you because I don't know. Yeah, I think engagement has to be first, because if you lose the engagement, then there's nothing you can tell them. If the engagement slips, whatever else you're trying to do will just be kind of lost into the wind. So that is always what we start with, and that's kind of the meter I use as I watch it in rehearsal and other things. Are people engaged? Have I lost them? Because no matter how good I feel about the idea we're trying to get out, if I've lost them, they're not going to hear it. So I think engagement has to trump it. However, I believe it's important to challenge attention spans, not to break them, but to challenge them, because we are trained. And this started when I was a kid, I feel like with MTV. We have been trained to suspend our patience sooner and sooner and sooner. And it's now gotten comical. Like, I get sucked into this too. If I go on TikTok, you give something 4 seconds, and like, nope, nope, nope. And you can do this mindlessly for hours. Like, that is how small our collective attention spans have been made to be. And this doesn't happen accidentally. People did this. People did this on purpose and are still doing it on purpose. So there's a part of me that's like, yes, engagement. However, there's something I want to tell. There's something in here, and I want to push that expected attention span just another 10, 20%, and maybe it'll start encouraging people to exercise in the other direction, just as a counter force. We're going to lose. I mean, it's everywhere, but just as a counter force to kind of that short attention span theater we're all. I hope so.
All right, right here in front.
I want to thank you for creating the musical monologue in Midnight Mass. I was growing up Catholic, and when Faith of Our Fathers came on, we were singing it in the home it was the whole song practically, and it was just like, wow, this put me in a mass at the time, and I just thought that was very cool. It's just a comment. That's all.
I did the same thing. I was an altar boy. I was raised Catholic. I was an altar boy for 12 years. And when the hymns came on in the show, I could sing all of them. We built a fake church, a set on a soundstage in Vancouver. And when I walked in, we designed it after the chapel of my childhood parish. And when I walked into it, without thinking, I reached over to the holy water. There was nothing in there. It was a set. But just as I walked in the door, I went, oh, wow, like this is just muscle memory. But yeah, I totally understand.
Right here.
Hi. Was there ever a time when you were writing the stories that you had to take a break because it was so scary?
I've never had to take a break because it was scary, but I've had to take a break because I've gotten sad. On Midnight Mass, on Hill House, there were things that were uncomfortable. With Midnight Mass in particular, I started working on Midnight Mass before I got sober. And a lot of my issues with alcohol, I was dissecting them in the show and I had no idea consciously. And it would make me profoundly uncomfortable. And it wasn't until I was sober and kind of looked back at it and was continuing to work on the show that I was like, that's why I kept putting it down. I didn't want to look at it. And so that's the kind of stuff that scares me, is that there's a certain point, and I'm never aware of it when it happens, it's only later, where I'll realize that it's an autopsy. I've cut myself open and taken out everything so I can look at it to try to make sense of it. And with Hill House, it was about a lot of death in my immediate family and suicide in my immediate family and things that I was very uncomfortable trying to process. And it was safe to do it in the show in a way I couldn't do it in life. That stuff scares me. The genre stuff, like the horror stuff, that stuff's fun. And you know, on set, we're never scared on set. Everyone's laughing. We're covered with blood. Like the stuff that upsets you guys the most or is the scariest while you watch it is the stuff we had the most fun doing. With the exception of the jump scare in the car in Hill House, because Victoria was a full minute ahead of her cue and I wasn't expecting it, and it scared the shit out of all of us. And I spit out coffee when it happened because they had another minute of scene to perform and I had no idea. And so that's the one time I was scared on set by a scare, and it was so good I was like, that's just going in the show. But yeah, the scary stuff is fun. It's the personal stuff is hard.
And what was the funniest thing
The
that happened?
The funniest thing that ever happened on a set? Oh geez. Well, that jump scare was up there because I mean a lot of people kind of lost their minds. I'll tell you the funniest thing that ever happened. You're not going to believe me. On the set of Dr. Sleep, there's a scene, this is Stephen King's fault. There's a scene where this group of psychic vampires brutally murders a kid. It's in the book. Yep, baseball boy. We cast my dear friend Jake Tremblay, who I first worked with when he was 6 and just worked with again on The Life of Chuck when he's 17. I'm getting too old, it's weird. But we cast Jake to do it, and the scene is he's getting tortured to death. And we all knew this was gonna be really hard to watch. So we designed the shot so that you didn't see anything at all. It was just a close-up of him and a reverse of them, and you never see the violence. And I thought, we'll be fine. And Jake's performance is so horribly real, and the pain and the anguish of it, that when he did it, everybody on set was traumatized, including Rebecca Ferguson, who's supposed to be murdering him, was like, And I'm sitting at the monitor like, oh no. And the scene ends and he's covered with, our special effects guy, Bob Kurtzman, is there just below frame with a paintbrush. He's dipping in fake blood and he's splattering him in the face. And that's how we implied the violence, which is funny. And he's just sitting there like, Jacob's going, ah, nothing's happening. And Bob's just going, huh, huh. But Bob's going, ah. And we finish and silence. Half of the true knot wandered away. Like Zahn McLaren was crying. Crow Daddy is crying. So he left. He's over there. Half of them just walked away. Half the crew abandoned their posts. They're gone. They're like, nope. I come out of the tent just like really shaken. And we call cut. And Jake, this is his 12th birthday, by the way, on the day we shot this. We had a cake for him in the shape, it was a red velvet cake in the shape of him. We thought that was real funny in prep. It's not funny on the day. And so Jake hops up, covered with blood, and goes, ha! And his dad was sitting there, because they'd rehearsed this for a month, so he knew what was going to happen. We're all stunned. His dad's sitting there like, Jake walks past his father. They high five. Jake goes right to the crafty and grabs some candy. He's fine. We're all in stunned silence. Rebecca Ferguson walks up next to me and she goes, wow. I said, yeah. She said, so you got that? I'm like, yeah, we got that. That was his shot. I mean, I have to turn around for them. And she goes, all right. There's no way that little shit's winning this scene. Turn around on me. And that was probably the funniest thing that ever happened on a set. But it was, yeah, whew, it was a weird night. It was a lot of fun.
I think we have time for like one more right here in the hat, please. Just hold on for a microphone. Thank you.
So Hush has been off of Netflix for quite some time.
Yeah.
And I believe you had said something about there might be some plans for another home for that. Can you say anything about that?
I can. So yes, Hush is off Netflix because our term that we made with them when we sold the film to them, which happened after Hush had its world premiere up the street at the State Theater, by the way. We took it back because I really, really value physical media. And Netflix, by policy, it does not work for their business plan. So we took it back. We do have a new home for it. I can't say where. I can say it will be on physical media, and that there are a lot of really awesome surprises that we've been working on for a year to make this release awesome. And something that'll be really exciting to the fans who've been waiting. But if you've been looking for Hush and it's nowhere to be found, it will be back soon and it'll be everywhere. And you'll be able to stream it. You'll be able to have it in your collection, and it's going to be worth the wait because we did some really awesome new stuff for it. So, yeah,
That's fantastic. And that was also quicker than I thought. So we do have time for one more in the back.
you were expecting me to monologue.
I actually was. Good. Talkers are a journalist's dream. I mean, I don't have to, I can just sit here and enjoy. Are you kidding?
Just so you don't hear this disembodied voice, okay?
Thank you. Yeah.
If you're working on an episodic and like further down the line and you think, monologue, would you do it with the actor or the performer in mind, how they could deliver it? Or would you want to like hew more closer to the story and message of the show?
Definitely the second option. I think it has to fit the story first and foremost, and then and frequently I don't know who's going to play the part. Even if I'm writing something for someone, there's no guarantee they'll be available. There's no guarantee I can get them approved by whatever studio's in charge. So even though in the back of my mind I can say, oh, this is for Coley, or this is for Annabeth Gish, or this is for Henry Thomas or Carla, it doesn't mean it will be. And there are times where availability changes things around. Like with Fall of the House of Usher, originally I had written Pym, who Mark Hamill played, for Henry Thomas. But because of a whole bunch of fun in the casting, Henry ended up playing Frederick, which opened up Pym, and that's how Mark came in. So you never know. So I try not to write for the actor. Generally, if I write for the character and the story, we're good. And if I cast the right actor, they will fit that monologue. And if I haven't cast the right actor, the monologue is the least of our problems.
Can I get a big hand for Mike Flanagan, please?
Thank you guys so much for coming.